very much, Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Since time is an important resource as well, especially this morning, I'm going to try to stick rigidly to the 7 minutes I'm allocated, and so I'm going to go very, very fast. CO2, the built environment, represents around the equivalent of about 11 to 12% of CO2 emissions in Ireland. That's the effort involved in actually delivering the built environment. It's not what happens afterwards in the use of the occupation of houses and so on, but the materials we need to produce and the effort involved in construction generates a lot of CO2. And in a developed economy, we don't have figures for Ireland specifically, but in a developed economy, it's around 11-12% of total CO2 emissions. It's a big number. If we want to reduce CO2 emissions, we can't afford not to do it also for the built environment. The next point I want to make is one of urgency. To quote very briefly from words of Jim Hansen, the NASA climate scientist, recently, he summarized the situation at the moment as the science is crystal clear and we cannot pretend we did not know. In other words, we now know for sure as science can deliver the message that the world is warming, and that warming is accelerating, and our production of CO2, which is the cause of it, is also accelerating. And we need to break that trend and start bringing it down rapidly. And this is the critical decade. If we fail to force an inflection in the curve of growth of CO2, we'll have lost control of the environment for the next 1,000 years. That's the penalty we pay in terms of damage to the environment if we fail to use this decade to control our addiction to CO2 emissions. We need in that more than just virtuous individuals. We need effective collective action. I was encouraged by the words of the Minister, but often I've heard that type of words from politicians in Ireland before, and they failed to put teeth to the measures which they've announced. I think it's important now that we collectively realise that we have to really deliver on these commitments and not talk about fancy ideas and fancy schemes that remain just that. So we need also to marshal resources, and the most important resource we have is money. I'll say a few words about that in a second. Going back to the built environment, that 11-12% of CO2, how does it arise? Or where does it arise from? Well, it arises from principally, over 90% of it comes from the materials that are manufactured for the purposes of construction. And the top 3 polluting materials in that respect are, the third one, with 7% of that contribution, is, believe it or not, timber. Timber also has a carbon footprint. The next one, the number 2, with 10% of the total of embodied CO2, is steel. The steel we put in has to be manufactured and generate CO2. But the number 1, the big baddie in this, that weighs in at 47% of the CO2 emissions in the built environment, is cement. We use a polluting 19th century technology, which is more polluting and less performing than the Roman cement, to build with today. And we have to change that habit if we're going to bring down. We cannot afford to ignore the elephant in the room. If you want to bring down the CO2 footprint of the built environment, you have to do something about cement. You cannot make progress without doing that. Fortunately, it is possible. The Minister referred to it, in the case of operating CO2, the CO2 necessary to run a house once it's built. We've actually reduced that over the last 10 years or so by 75%. We've made spectacular progress, even though we need to do more. But we have made spectacular progress, and it should be saluted. But in the case of the 40 tons of CO2 that's emitted in order to build that house in the first place, in fact, that figure has been going up over that period. We're putting more materials into the house and therefore giving it a larger initial embodied carbon footprint. So I am encouraged, however, by one development which the Minister said we'll hear a bit more about today, and that is the government's plans on green public procurement. We don't know the details. I don't know the details at this stage. I'm looking forward to hearing them. But I think what the echoes I've heard are encouraging, and that for the first time, the issue of embodied CO2 in building materials is being elected in a potentially meaningful way. And again, what we need to look for there is not just the good intentions, it's the effective delivery on these policies. Now, I want to talk briefly about the issue of money and finance. It's very important. We have limited resources. It's very important that in tackling this, we use those as well as possible. We cannot afford to waste money in this battle. The main policy instrument now being used in Europe to combat CO2 emissions is the emissions trading scheme. Now, the emissions trading scheme has many defects which apply across Europe, but none worse than in Ireland. In Ireland, in the built environment sector, the ETS is acting effectively to give massive subsidies for the pollution for the production of polluting products. The cement sector in Ireland will, by the year 2020, have collected subsidies of the order of 600 to 800 million euros for no reduction in CO2. That's to say, if those subsidies didn't exist, the CO2 would be exactly the same. That money has been handed over for no performance. And we cannot afford to waste money on such a grand scale. Not only that, because the expected performance in terms of CO2 emissions is so high in the cement sector, the government is actually planning to reduce CO2 emissions even more severely in the non-ETS sector. So in other words, the taxpayer is going to pick up the cost of CO2 reductions that are not they're not getting the benefit of in the cement sector. This is utter madness. Economic and climate, from a climate point of view, absolutely scandalous to take major amounts of money like this and hand them out for no reward, for no result. So I want in summary, to ask the government, in formatting its new climate change roadmap, take account of the urgency of effective action now. Look at the question of resources and make sure we get the best use of the resources that are available, and there are substantial resources available if we tackle the issues of redesigning schemes so they deliver their incentives and their supports in ways that are consistent with our objectives. We have the extraordinary situation that the ETS actually is making Ireland the go-to country in Europe for the production for CO2 emissions. If you have a dirty process in the cement industry, you come to Ireland to use it, because there you will pay no penalty for it. The taxpayer will pick up the cost of your CO2 emissions. We have to stop that nonsense if we're to make real progress in this area. Our Taoiseach says on numerous occasions, he likes to use the phrase, he wants Ireland to become the small country, the best small country in the world in which to do business. And I would like to see this decade be the decade in which Ireland becomes the best big or small country in the world in which to do sustainable construction. I emphasize again, this decade. If we miss this opportunity, the game is up, and we've condemned the next 30 generations to to disastrous climate conditions. I hope your discussions today will reflect that sense of urgency, and also the growing demand across the community, and especially amongst the professionals and the business people in the built environment community, for at last to get real effective action underway in Ireland. Thank you for your attention.